When you really think about it, Aluxer, every society's main project is, in many ways, to get rich, right? But why is it that some societies manage to build abundant wealth while others never quite escape the cycle of poverty? Well, if you study history and economics, you'll see that rich societies follow quite a predictable path. So here's the plan, okay? We're gonna show you how that process actually works. From individual people learning how to escape poverty, become rich, and build billion-dollar empires, to designing rich cities, combining those into a rich country, and eventually a prosperous, thriving society. If you've ever wondered how wealth at the macro level is built, this is your blueprint, my friend. Welcome to Alux, the place where future billionaires come to get inspired. All right, so let's start off at the micro level with how an individual person escapes the cycle of poverty. Every rich society needs a thriving middle class, and while raising people out of poverty is tough and messy, and most people have no idea what it actually takes, if you want to build a rich society, it is absolutely necessary. Expect some brutal truths here today because right now we're going to walk you through the full process, step by step, of what it really takes to go from poor to middle class. So obviously, before we climb out of poverty, you need to understand what it even is, the reality of poverty. Because the thing is, poverty looks very differently depending on where you live. According to the World Bank, over 700 million people around the world live on less than $2.15 a day, which is considered absolute poverty in low-income countries. But there's still poverty in high-income countries. In the US, over 37 million people live below the poverty line, which means they earn less than $15,060 a year, and for a double-income household, less than $20,340 a year. The rest of the population earns above that, but still, millions more are just one emergency away from dropping below that poverty line. Honestly, though, numbers don't really capture the full weight of poverty. Wherever you live, being poor means you waste hours on unreliable buses and low-paying jobs. It means walking around your neighborhood scared you might get attacked, that you avoid the doctor because you can't afford the bill, that you skip meals so your kids can eat. So it's not just about the money, right? Poverty eats away at your time, your relationships, your safety, and your options. And when you're stuck in that kind of life long enough, you start to believe that's all there is. Now, some people end up in these situations because of their own bad decisions, but unfortunately sometimes it's just the result of a string of bad luck, or more likely it's just where you were born. The truth is, you don't get to choose whether you're born into poverty or not. And if it's your starting point, it is not your fault. However, this doesn't mean you can't do something about it. There is a way out, and if you're willing to do the work, the path is clearer than you might think. It is still brutally hard, yes, but it is possible, and that is what we're here to talk about. Going from poor to middle class isn't some kind of magic trick. It simply is a series of brutal truths you need to face and practical steps you need to follow. And it starts off like this. Step number 1 is to heal your relationship with money. Because poverty isn't just not having any money, it's a mindset of either shame or ignorance. Some people, unfortunately, just don't know anything about money, how to get it, or even why it's important, so they just default to thinking that money is the root of all evil. But what goes under the radar much of the time is that a lot of poor people live with an inbuilt shame around money. They're ashamed of needing help, of their bad decisions, or just not knowing what they quote-unquote should already know. And eventually that shame turns into avoidance. They stop opening up their bills, they stop checking their bank account, they stop taking care of their money-related responsibilities because it just provokes fear in them. The problem, of course, is that ignoring your money doesn't make those problems go away, it makes those problems worse. So to escape poverty, the first step is you have to face it head on. You have to stop tying your self-worth to how much or how little money you have. You have to stop believing that money is dirty or only for superficial people or the root of all evil. Because until you unlearn those attitudes, you've got no chance of escaping poverty. Honestly, a lot of people need to hear this, all right? It's okay to want to move up in life. Money is a tool, that's all. And the way you use it is a reflection of the kind of life you want to live. Once you start seeing money this way, you stop wasting it trying to impress people or comfort yourself. And now you can really start to walk the path out of poverty. All right, so the next step after you've fixed your mindset is to fix your environment, right? This is the step most people overlook, but it is absolutely critical. You see, if every day is unpredictable, if the people around you are toxic and destructive, and if you're surrounded by addiction, abuse, or all-around negative people, then no amount of work is going to get you out of poverty. You're just going to keep going around and around in the same cycle. Instead, what you want is to create an environment of stability, a daily routine, a life that you can rely on, okay? Now, this isn't always dramatic, right? Honestly, the foundation is rooted in simple habits. Going to sleep at the same time every night, organizing your space so it's not stressful, planning your meals in advance so you're not scrambling. Then you move on to removing the things that are keeping you stuck. That might mean distancing yourself from people you've known your whole life, but who pull you down, drain your energy, or sabotage your efforts. It might mean moving out of your hometown, even if it's scary, because the opportunities just don't exist where you are. And for some people, it might mean cutting out gambling, drinking, late-night doom scrolling, and all of those bad habits that keep you in a constant spiral of self-sabotage. At this point, it's about doing whatever you can, with whatever you have, to create a calm, semi-predictable life with real opportunity. Admittedly, these are some of the bigger, more consequential moves. You might be cutting off people that you've known your whole life. But it's worth it because when you get your environment back in your control, you can finally focus on your goals, no matter what people who don't want to see you succeed have to say. And so for the first time, your life becomes a place where progress is actually possible. Think of it like this. Imagine your financial health is represented by this bucket. Every so often you get some money so the bucket fills up, but every so often you spend money and it gets drained. The key to really making progress is to make sure the bucket is filling up faster than it drains. And that means creating a steady stream that keeps the bucket full, which is why step 3 is securing a reliable source of income. Yep, not the next Amazon, not a side hustle, and definitely not some kind of get-rich-quick scheme you found online, okay? The first thing you need is a steady, reliable paycheck that hits your bank account on time every month. It doesn't really matter if you're working in fast food, manufacturing, cleaning, retail, or whatever, okay? Forget about the status. You need something to put legal money in your bank account every week. That's your goal. Getting your first reliable paycheck is gonna be a game changer because when your income is unpredictable, everything feels like a crisis, right? One flat tire, an unexpected bill, even a minor medical expense, and the whole system collapses. So your move here is dead simple. Get a job. It might not make you rich, but this step isn't about that, okay? It's not about chasing your passion or changing the world either. It's simply about giving your financial life some semblance of structure again, which means you're finally in a position to build the rest of your life. Now, bringing back our bucket analogy, okay? You've got some water flowing in, that's fantastic. But remember, there are still leaks in the bucket because when you're poor, it's not always the big things that ruin you. It's the broken toilet you can't afford to fix, the flat tire that cuts you off from your job, or that missed phone bill that throws your whole week into chaos. At this point, life still feels like a series of stupid but constant and costly obstacles. That is why step 4 here is all about eliminating those crises and plugging those leaks for good. These crises can feel overwhelming, right? But once you've got a steady income flowing in, you've got the power to start fixing things. You can finally pay off debt collectors who've been calling you every day, repair the leaking roof that's slowly ruining your home, or replace the tire that's been keeping you from getting to work. For some, the solutions might even be simpler, like finally getting proper identification, opening up your first bank account, or setting up a small emergency fund so no single emergency can ruin your life all of a sudden. Now, these steps might seem kind of small, right? But do not underestimate their impact, because once those leaks are plugged, you'll notice something incredible happening. Your hard-earned income stops disappearing into crisis after crisis, month by month, paycheck by paycheck. Your bucket actually starts to fill up, and for the first time you start to plan beyond just surviving tomorrow. Once you've reached this point, you're ready to start actively building the life you've always imagined. But getting into the nitty-gritty now, the only way to climb out of poverty is to meaningfully increase your income. When you're poor, the only way to do that is to get a job that pays more, and the only way to do that is to increase your income value, and the only way to do that is to learn a valuable skill, and that is step 5. Remember, okay, we're talking about going from poor to middle class here. This isn't about chasing your passion or finding your life's purpose. It's about leaving survival mode behind. So pick something practical that's in demand and that you can learn about in the next 6 to 12 months. Think welding, sales, IT, coding, digital marketing, even trade skills like carpentry and plumbing. Again, it doesn't have to be glamorous, okay? So don't go $80,000 into debt for a degree in fish psychology from Harvard. You're trying to double, triple, or 5x your income without spending the next decade in school. But for the time being, you're going to be spending your time learning relentlessly. You'll watch tutorials, take courses, find mentors, and practice every day, because the more valuable your skill set, the more valuable your time becomes, and the faster you climb out of poverty. So look around, and you'll see that life looks way different than when we started today. You've upgraded your job, your income, and your skills. You're no longer working just to survive. For the first time, you are well on your way to the middle class, and it might even feel like you're already there. But not quite yet. Because here's the thing about the middle class. Honestly, it's a bit of an illusion, but not because it's not real. It's just that it's temporary. Most middle-class people don't stay middle-class very long. They either bounce between just getting by and almost broke again and again, or they basically are guaranteed to swing to the upper class. So the truth is that there is no middle class, only a transitional stage where you either dip back into poverty or you get on the fast track to becoming rich. Now, obviously, you're going to want to be on the rich side of the equation here, right? And to do that, you need to build 2 things: a safety net and a catapult. That's the next step, okay? You've come this far, right? So the last thing you want to do is get wiped out by one bad break. That's why you need the safety net, to protect yourself when life inevitably throws something your way. So this is what a good safety net looks like. You've got 3 to 6 months of living expenses saved up. You've got health insurance, you're keeping your skills sharp and in demand, and you're building a good reputation at work, so you know people who can vouch for you when you need a new job or a second chance. Once you've got this, you've made the chance of dipping back into poverty as low as possible. That's good. But now, how do you also maximize your chances of ascending to the upper class? Well, that is what your catapult is for. So in reality, your catapult is meant to set you up for a long-term financial freedom. Setting that up usually means buying a modest home you can afford and grow into, starting a diversified long-term investment portfolio, some retirement accounts, and even things like building a good credit score. None of it is revolutionary stuff, but that's not the point here, okay? The point of a catapult isn't to get you to yachts and private jets. Remember, we're just going from pure survival to a respectable life here, and this is how you do it. When you've got both of these, a safety net and a catapult, that is when you're no longer afraid of the bottom and you're no longer stuck at the same level, which means you've officially made it to the middle class and you're already on your way to something even better. But what does it actually mean to be middle class? Well, it means your life works. Your rent is paid, your lights stay on, you can afford groceries without checking your bank account 3 times, you've got a stable job, a roof over your head, health insurance, savings, and enough money to handle the random stuff that life throws at you. You're not rich yet, but you've got plans, and you're in the headspace to make them come to life. You can look at your future and say, this is just the beginning. So that, Aluxer, is how you lift yourself or a society out of poverty. That was a massive deep dive, right? And we are just getting started. As you can probably tell by now, part of building a rich society is becoming rich yourself. And that's exactly why we built the Alux app. The foundation of your wealth is your education. So we've packed the Alux app with everything you need to learn to become the most capable, most confident, and most successful version of yourself in every area of life. Inside the app, you'll find a library of expert-led lessons, daily insights, and personal growth tools designed to help you achieve your goals. So whether your goal is to get your mindset right, improve your habits, start a business, or build society-level wealth, the Alux app gives you the knowledge and the structure to make real progress toward it. If you're ready to take your personal education seriously, scan the QR code on screen right now to download the app, and you'll get 25% off your yearly plan. Don't be afraid to invest in yourself, my friend. It is the only investment that literally lasts forever. But now, let's move on to the next step in how society gets rich. All right, so you've got a thriving middle class by this point, but that does not mean you're rich. Most people never realize that they're actually stuck in the middle class because, well, it feels pretty comfortable. The problem is comfort makes you settle, and that is the reason most people and most societies never become what they're truly capable of. We want you to reach your true potential, my friends, so let's expose how the middle class trap works, the exact step-by-step process to escape it, and show you what life really looks like when you're finally rich. Now, most people grow up believing that the middle class is the finish line, right? You work hard, you get a job, you buy a house, and if you do all of that, you've made it. And I mean, your fridge will never be empty, you can drive a decent car, and even take a vacation when you can afford it. Yeah, it's nothing flashy, but if you're looking around and thinking, this is kind of my situation, do not take that for granted. Compared to poverty, being middle class is a massive privilege. But what nobody talks about is that the middle class, especially in wealthy countries, isn't just a social position you arrive at. It's a system that somebody designed for you. Think of it like living inside of a box. The walls are padded with comfort, enough income to cover your needs, just a little bit left over for some wants and some reassurance that you're doing fine. But those same walls have invisible limits, right? They're not built to help you discover your full potential, financially or personally. Instead, their only goal is to keep you productive enough to keep the system running, but not free so you could walk away from it entirely. If you ask most middle-class people how long they could survive if they stopped working right now, the answer is probably like 1 to 2 months at most. They can't get off the hamster wheel because they don't have the financial freedom if they're living paycheck to paycheck, no matter how big that paycheck is. But the thing is, the trap works because it rewards the behaviors that keep you in it. You get your yearly raise and it's like, great, here's a slightly higher credit limit. Go get yourself a bigger mortgage and a nicer car. On the surface, it looks like you're getting richer, but it only means that your life is getting more expensive. So over time, your choices, your habits, even your personal dreams begin to match what's reasonable for somebody with your income. Poverty is obvious, okay? You feel it every day, but what's so dangerous about the middle class is that it's quiet. It's not urgent. It's not painful enough to force you into action. It just sits there in the background of your life, slowly making you complacent. And that's the real danger, okay? You stop questioning what's possible for your life because the system you're in makes it feel like you've already got enough. Breaking out of this trap starts with seeing it for what it is, a system designed to keep you busy until your productive years are over. But the good news is, there is a way out. In fact, there's a clear set of steps that anyone willing to think and act differently can follow. And the goal isn't just to get you a little bit richer, it's to build the kind of life where you've got full financial freedom. You can travel the world and you don't have to answer to anybody. So let's break it down, okay? Here's how you escape the middle class and join the ranks of the rich. So, your first step here is going to be recognizing that you are, in fact, in a trap. Until you acknowledge that, you'll keep playing the same game with the same rules and the same limits. Now, this isn't about hating the middle class or resenting where you're at. It's simply about getting brutally honest with yourself and saying, I'm here now, but I'm capable of more, and I refuse to let that go to waste. That decision is more important than you could ever realize, because that is the moment you stop making decisions based on what is safe and start making decisions based on where you want to be. Now, whether you realize it or not, making this commitment comes with another one. You're committing to sacrifice, and it's better to accept that reality now than to be caught off guard later. Because, as obvious as it sounds, in order to change your life, you have to change your life. That means embracing risk, it means embracing discomfort, and it probably means working harder than you ever have before. Once you accept that, then you can start. So, if step 1 is about deciding to leave the trap, step 2 is about building the tools to actually do it. And the most powerful tools you can have are high-income skills. We're talking about stuff like sales, marketing, copywriting, coding, product design, leadership negotiation. Rare, in-demand, and scalable skills that allow you to create opportunities, solve big problems, and get paid for it. And the best part about learning high-income skills is you don't need anybody's permission to get started. See, when you've got a set of valuable skills, you don't have to wait for a boss to give you a raise. You can find or create opportunities anytime you want, no matter where you are in the world. And if you want to get paid more, just learn a skill that's going to solve bigger problems. The middle class gets stuck because their income is directly tied to their time, and their time is capped at 24 hours a day, right? The rich break that link by selling value instead of hours. And the way you do that is by learning even more valuable skills. Yeah, it takes a lot of work and a good amount of time if you actually want to get good at something, but remember, this isn't about adding a few extra dollars to your paycheck. It's about having the ability to make money on your own terms. Back to today's topic, shall we? So, step 3 is to build your first profit machine, because by this point you've built one or a few valuable skill sets, and now it's finally time to put them to work. Now, whether you realize it or not, this is the moment you become an entrepreneur. And if that sounds intimidating, look, entrepreneurship isn't as complicated as people make it out to be. At its core, it's just about finding people who have a problem you can solve with your skills and getting paid to solve it for them. That is it. So here's where you start to build what we call your first profit machine. At this stage, it's not about building the next Facebook, okay? It's just about creating something that makes money and teaches you the fundamentals of running a business, because the sooner you start, the sooner you learn how to find customers, deliver value, and get paid for it. And that's worth more than any book, course, or degree. The best way to get going is to start with something you're already good at. If you're a writer, offer copywriting services. If you're great with numbers, do bookkeeping for local businesses. If you can design code, sell, teach, fix, build, or train dogs, there's someone out there willing to pay you for it, guaranteed. The beauty of this step isn't the money. At first, your business might just cover your rent, but the identity shift that comes with that money changes everything, okay? You stop thinking like an employee who waits for permission, and you start thinking like a builder who creates opportunities. And once your profit machine is running, you face your next big challenge. Step 4 is to reinvest in scale. If you've made it this far, you're making money and you already know you can make some more. But here's where people in the middle class and even many first-time business owners totally blow it. They get a taste of extra income and they immediately go looking for ways to spend it. A bigger house, a nicer car, fancier vacations. And we talked about this already, right? It's why middle-class people can't afford to get off the hamster wheel. Instead, you have to do what the rich do. Reinvest your profits back into your growth. This means upgrading your tools so you can work faster and deliver more value, improving your system so the business runs smoother, and most importantly, investing in people. You see, a lot of ambitious people insist on doing everything themselves, and they end up getting caught in the freelance trap. Sure, you are your own boss, but you're also your only employee, and that's not a business, that's just self-employment with a few extra steps. If your goal is to truly get rich, like millionaire status, you have to free up your time so you can focus on strategy, growth, and creating new income streams. And that means finding great people, training them, trusting them, and paying them well. Once you commit to reinvesting, your business stops being a personal side hustle and starts becoming a real wealth-building machine. But the thing about this step is it's not a one and done kind of thing. Reinvesting is something you'll do over and over as many times as it takes until your machine reaches the number that feels rich to you. For some people, that might mean a few $100,000 a year. For others, it might mean millions. But the formula doesn't change, okay? Keep pouring resources back into the business. Keep making it bigger, faster, and more resilient until it's making as much money as you want it to. But here's the thing, okay? Making money isn't the same as building wealth. No matter how good your business is, there's always a risk. You could have a bad year, a major client could disappear, entire industries could get disrupted overnight. If your lifestyle depends entirely on your business running perfectly, you're basically walking a tightrope with no safety net. And if something knocks you off before you're ready, you could end up sliding right back into the middle class. After all of this work, that is the last thing you want, right? And that's why step 5 is to build your wealth system. This is what's going to let you live the lifestyle you want without constantly worrying about the next sale, the next client, or the next month's revenue. And the system looks like this, okay? First, there's your business or businesses. That's where the money is made, but it's not where your lifestyle comes from. Instead of paying for your lifestyle directly out of business profits, you take that money and you put it into your growing pool of investments. This is your wealth. You know, your stocks, real estate, all of the assets that produce a steady stream of returns for you. And it's those returns that pay for your day-to-day life. With this system, creates a powerful chain reaction where the more your business earns, the more assets you own, and the more assets you own, the more income you have coming in without lifting a finger. And think about it, okay? If something happens to your business, you can still pay for the same lifestyle you've always had because your wealth stays intact. Sure, it might stop growing for a little while, but your day-to-day life doesn't change. When you've got both of these, a business you can grow and a pool of wealth that keeps paying you, that is when you're no longer tied to the hamster wheel, and that's the foundation of true wealth, my friend. When you stop worrying about how much you made this month and start thinking about how many decades you can live exactly the way you want. Which means you've officially made it to the rich life that we've been talking about, and from here, the only direction left to go is up. So, what exactly does it mean to be rich? Well, you're probably a multimillionaire, which means that for most things, you've built a life where money is no longer the deciding factor in what you can or can't do. Your bills are covered by income that flows in whether you're working or not. You can travel when you want, upgrade your home if you feel like it, and treat yourself and the people you care about to the good life. Not just on special occasions, but whenever you want to. It means you're not chained to an office or a boss. You choose the projects that you work on, the people you spend time with, and the goals you pursue. It means security. You've got assets working for you and a lifestyle supported by wealth you've already built. So if you followed these steps, you've done more than just make money, right? You've bought back your time, your choices, and your freedom. You're living life on your own terms, and that's what being truly rich is all about. Because look, okay, at the end of the day, this was never just about the money. It was about unlocking your potential, pushing yourself past limits you never thought you could. The money is great, sure, but the real prize is the person you become while earning it. So that is how you go from middle class to rich. If you're learning and getting value from this video so far, leave us a like, subscribe, and drop a comment with what you found the most helpful so far, because we would love to know. But moving on now, okay? Because here's the thing. We've seen how you get rich, but if you actually want to build wealth at the societal level, rich is simply not enough. Every rich society needs billionaires because they're basically a sign that you are a serious economy, right? And you know, according to Forbes magazine, there are 2,838 known billionaires in the world, and 67% of them are self-made. No trust fund, no rich parents, they started from scratch. That should flip a switch in your mind because it means that being born rich isn't the only way to really get rich, whether you're thinking just about you or your society. So let's break down the 6 most common paths to becoming a self-made billionaire without getting anything handed to you. Some are risky, some are just plain common sense, but they all prove that you can create wealth if you're willing to do what it takes. Now, before we get into the most common paths to becoming a self-made billionaire, let's talk about the other side of the equation, inheriting that wealth. Because if 67% of billionaires are self-made, it means that 33% of them were born into their fortune. But the thing is, it's not so black and white. Some billionaires are literally born into billions, like the Walton family. They're some of the richest people in America today, not because they built Walmart themselves, but because they inherited the company's shares from their father. Then there are the kinds of billionaires who don't start with billions, but they do inherit enough money that for them, it's pretty much guaranteed to get there. With the right assets compounding over time, their money grows into more money almost on autopilot. And finally, there's the kind of billionaire who starts off with money but still has to put in the work to scale it. As Donald Trump, of all people, famously said, "My father gave me a small loan of $1 million. Yeah, small loan. People make fun of him for that line, but if you stop to think about it, turning $1 million into $1 billion means multiplying it by 1,000. That's still an extraordinary thing to do, and you do have to pay back a loan. The point is, even though not every billionaire is a clean-cut textbook definition of self-made, becoming one is a monumental achievement no matter where you start. And it's also worth noting that even inherited wealth doesn't come out of thin air. Somebody made that money, probably in one of the 6 ways we're going to talk about here today. Remember, my friend, nobody in the Walton family is considered a self-made billionaire today, but Sam Walton, their father, he did build Walmart from the ground up. And he actually did it by following the very first path we're about to explore, starting a high-growth business. Now, this is the classic route to becoming a self-made billionaire, the founder's path. If you want to know what it looks like in practice, study Howard Schultz. When he first got involved with Starbucks in the 1980s, you couldn't find a Starbucks around every corner like you can today. Back then, it was a small chain of coffee shops in Seattle that didn't even serve coffee. They only sold it in bags so you could make it yourself at home. But when Schultz joined Starbucks in 1982, he had a crazy idea that it could become a household name around the world. And in 1987, he took the risk to make it happen by acquiring the company. But building Starbucks into what it is today took decades. Decades of raising capital, expanding internationally, and reinvesting into growth. By the mid-1950s, Starbucks went public on the stock market. Schultz owned a meaningful stake in the company, and so as the stock price soared over the years, so did his net worth until eventually it compounded into billions. The first path is the most common way to become a billionaire, but it doesn't happen overnight. But don't think of this as a bad thing, okay? $1 billion is a lot of money, so honestly, that's kind of expected. The key lesson for you here, Aluxer, is that the reason founders absolutely dominate the billionaire lists is that they can see potential where others don't and invest decades before the real payoff arrives. Starting a high-growth business is hard. Most people fail. But if you go all the way, the upside is unlike anything else. That's why the majority of self-made billionaires follow this exact path. Now, growing a company yourself is one way to become a billionaire, but you don't always have to do the work yourself. Sometimes, all it takes is owning a piece of the right company. And that's why the second path to becoming a self-made billionaire is by owning a business. Not as a passive investor, but as someone with a meaningful stake in a business that scales. Take Steve Jobs. Most people assume he became a billionaire because of Apple, but that's actually not true. In 1986, Jobs actually bought Pixar from the guy who created Star Wars for just $10 million. Now, of course, he wasn't a director, and he wasn't the one writing Toy Story or animating Finding Nemo. At Pixar, Jobs was essentially a high-level ideas guy, someone with vision, connections, and the ability to lead people. Pixar went public on the stock market in 1995, riding off the success of Toy Story. And since Jobs owned about 80% of the company, his stake grew to over $1 billion pretty much overnight. When Disney later acquired Pixar in 2006, Jobs got a payout of almost $4 billion, which, funnily enough, actually ended up turning him into the largest shareholder of Disney. So that is the power of ownership. It creates leverage. Jobs didn't do the day-to-day creative work, but by being the owner of Pixar, he captured the upside of everything the company built. Now, obviously, this path can be incredibly risky because if you own a bad company, it usually means bad news. But if you've got the vision to identify billion-dollar opportunities, the guts to place a damn risky bet, and the discipline to let talented people do what they do best, you can make it to the top no matter where you start. And the third path isn't just a way to become a billionaire, it's the path to becoming the richest person alive, and it always has been. If you look through history, the greatest fortunes have almost always come from people at the forefront of new technology. During the Industrial Revolution, it was steel, oil, and railroads. Andrew Carnegie, John D. Rockefeller, and Cornelius Vanderbilt were the wealthiest men of their era because they controlled the technologies that reshaped the world. During the Computer Revolution, it was Bill Gates and Larry Ellison. Fast forward to today, and nothing has changed, okay? The biggest fortunes of our time come from technology, too. Look at Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, and Elon Musk. I mean, they're probably the richest people in history because they're pushing the boundaries of electric cars, autonomous driving, space travel, and now artificial intelligence. The point is simple. Starting and owning traditional businesses can get you rich. But if you want to build the largest fortune possible, you do it by riding the wave of new industries before they become mainstream. This path is the most rewarding, but it's also the hardest one out of them all, because you have to create value out of something that 99.99% of people probably don't understand. But take a look around, and that's what the wealthiest people in history have always done. They see what's coming next, whether it's AI, renewable energy, biotech, or space, and they build companies that scale globally around those technologies. If you manage to win one of these races, your name is going to be written in the history books, my friend, and your wallet will thank you. Now, the fourth path to billionaire status is fame. But there really are two routes here, okay? One is the ultra-rare megastar path. People like Taylor Swift, who became so culturally dominant that her tours, masters, and licensing deals made her a billionaire all by themselves. But honestly, Taylor's kind of like the exception. The more common route is to leverage your fame because you have influence and a loyal audience. You can transform that into products, businesses, and investments that scale far beyond your original talent. Just look at these examples, okay? Michael Jordan's real wealth comes from his partnership with Nike and Air Jordan's brand, which still sells billions of dollars every year. Rihanna became a billionaire because she used her global recognition to launch Fenty Beauty. Kanye West, for all of his controversies, built Yeezy, one of the most influential fashion brands of the decade, and it pushed his net worth into the billions. And the list goes on, okay? Cristiano Ronaldo, Oprah, Dr. Dre, Kim Kardashian, Roger Federer, LeBron James. All of them celebrities who didn't get rich for the reasons they got famous. And that's the real takeaway here. Fame can make you rich, but leveraging that fame can make you wealthy. A billionaire, if you do it right. All right, moving on now. The fifth path to billionaire status is slower, quieter, and in many ways more difficult for people to follow than starting or even owning a company. The next common way to become a self-made billionaire is through investing. Now, this path is all about patience. No one embodies this better than Warren Buffett. Back in the 1950s, Buffett started with just over $100,000 in savings, money he'd earned and invested since he was a teenager. And his strategy was remarkably simple. He bought good companies that he thought were undervalued. He held on to them for decades, and he let that power of compounding just do its thing. Yeah. That's a bit of an oversimplification, sure, but it's basically how Buffett grew Berkshire Hathaway into one of the most successful investment vehicles in history. Literally, okay, if you bought $1,000 of Berkshire stock back in 1965, that would be worth more than $30 million today. That is the exponential power of compounding. But let's be clear about this, okay? Very few people reach Buffett's level by simply buying and holding stocks. He's the exception, not the rule, and he didn't even cross the billionaire mark until he was in his 50s. But at the same time, investing is also one of the most common traits among billionaires, self-made and otherwise. Because once they build wealth through other means, investing is what keeps their fortunes growing. So don't think about these paths as being isolated boxes that you have to choose between. In reality, most billionaires blend them. They might build or own a company, but they also put their money to work. So, Investing isn't always how you start the journey, but it's almost always how you sustain it. Now, of course, investing doesn't only mean buying stocks and waiting decades for compounding to work. The next way that people become self-made billionaires is through diversified investments, which means you're spreading your capital across real estate, private equity, debt instruments, operating businesses, and even experimental ventures, each with the potential to skyrocket in value. A fascinating example of this is a billionaire named Kenneth Brian Dart. Now, he's the kind of billionaire who's famous for keeping a low profile, but behind the scenes, he's quietly constructed one of the most diversified fortunes in the world. Dart has developed entire towns in the Cayman Islands, invested in sovereign debt and mortgage-backed securities, taken major stakes in tobacco giants, even poured hundreds of millions into neuroscience research. His wealth isn't tied to a single bet. It's the sum of dozens of carefully chosen plays across industries, asset classes, and continents, each one building on his wealth. Now, most billionaires eventually adopt this approach because it makes it so that no single downturn can wipe them out, while also giving them exposure to upside across multiple domains. One success funds the next, and before long, you've built a portfolio so robust, it keeps growing almost on autopilot. That's the greatest thing about diversification. Given enough time and the right moves, it's both catapult and a safety net. At the end of the day, every billionaire's story looks different on the surface, but the common thread is resilience, persistence, and strategy. You don't need to follow every path we've talked about, but you can learn from them and use those lessons to build your own version of success. So, those, Aluxer, are the 6 most common ways to become a billionaire self-made. Hopefully you're enjoying this video so far, and remember to give it a like, subscribe for more, and leave us a comment saying what you're learning. If you've reached this point, first of all, give yourself a high five, and second of all, look, okay, everything you've seen so far is actually the easy part, because making a person rich is only the beginning. In order to build a rich society, you have to start thinking bigger, in entire cities and countries. At the end of the day, that's what societies are made of, so let's take a look at how a rich city is actually built. You know, every city wants to be rich, right? But few ever get there, and even fewer manage to stay there. That's because building a prosperous society is tough, okay? That's putting it lightly. But when you look closely, the world's wealthiest cities throughout all of history have actually gotten the same handful of principles right. So let's take a look at exactly how they do it, the steps they take, the mistakes they avoid, and what the best cities in the world do differently. Alright, so the first principle any city has to apply if it wants to be rich is simple, but it's easier said than done. Attract talented people. Look at a city like Detroit, okay? Back in the time of Henry Ford, engineers, designers, and factory workers all flooded to be a part of the auto boom. But then the industry collapsed. The city failed to reinvent itself, and the flow of new talented people dried up. It just goes to show that without talented people, a city has no future. But on the other hand, take Silicon Valley. Before it was home to Apple, Google, and Nvidia, it was nothing more than farmland dotted with orchards. The transformation began in the 1930s when Stanford University started encouraging its professors and graduates to build their own companies instead of leaving for the East Coast. Hewlett-Packard was one of the first success stories, and it drew more engineers, more investors, and more ambition. By the 1970s, Silicon Valley had become a magnet for the brightest minds in technology, and the network effect was powerful, okay? Once the people were there, everything else followed: capital, innovation, and global influence. You see, the most valuable resource a city can have is its people, specifically ambitious, educated, hungry for success kind of people. One of the best ways to attract them is to build great universities. For the Valley, it's Stanford, but look at Boston. Harvard and MIT, they attract billions in research funding and produce founders who go on to build world-changing companies. When a city positions itself as the place ambitious people want to move to, well, it sets off a chain reaction of innovation and growth. But that is why the next principle is one of the trickiest to get right. It's not enough to just attract talent, you have to keep it there. look at San Francisco today, okay? It's still packed with opportunity, but with sky-high rents, rising crime and homelessness, and a shrinking quality of life, thousands of talented people have chosen to get out. It's a prime example of how even a city at the heart of global innovation can start bleeding its most valuable resource if life there becomes unbearable. But to show you how it looks on the other side of the equation, it is no coincidence that a ton of people moving out of San Francisco have been relocating in Austin, Texas. For years, it was just another mid-sized American city, but recently it's had a massive boom. Tesla set up a giant factory. Big tech firms opened up offices, and thousands of skilled workers relocated, and they're generally happy there. Why? Well, because Austin feels affordable. It's got a strong sense of culture, and it offers the kind of lifestyle people want to stick around for. It's not just that it's good for jobs. It's a place people want to live in long after their workday ends. Attracting people is only half the battle, though. The other half is retention, and that comes from making a city livable, safe, inspiring. If talented people can imagine building their careers and lives there, they'll stay. And when they stay, well, that's when wealth compounds. And speaking of, the next principle for any city that wants to get rich is to eliminate crime and corruption. Just look at Caracas, Venezuela. Now, Venezuela is blessed with some of the most abundant oil reserves on the planet. But violence, extortion, and sketchy elections are also part of daily life there. Instead of becoming one of the wealthiest cities in the Americas, crime, corruption, and political instability have driven both people and businesses away. But on the other hand, take Singapore. In the 1960s, when it broke away from Malaysia, it was a tiny, swampy island with no natural resources, a poor population, and little global relevance. And worse, it was full of crime and corruption. But the new government cracked down on all of that with ruthless efficiency, paying civil servants competitive wages so bribes weren't as tempting, and enforcing rules in a way that businesses could trust. The result was that companies' new contracts would be honored, investments would be protected, and disputes would be resolved fairly. That turned Singapore into one of the safest, most business-friendly hubs in the world, with an insane amount of talent and capital for a country of its size. Because you see, a city that controls crime and corruption sends a powerful message. This is a place where there are rules, and money loves rules, right? Think of it this way. Entrepreneurs won't risk their savings in a city where gangs control neighborhoods. Global investors won't put billions into projects if contracts are meaningless. And talented people won't stay if they fear their families aren't safe. If you want to be able to think big, you need to root out crime and corruption. So with all of that said, we've got the basics down, right? Now it's time to start getting into the advanced stuff. The next principle all cities have to get right to get wealthy is to build infrastructure. And this is a non-negotiable, okay? Just look at Lagos, Nigeria. On paper, it should be one of Africa's wealthiest cities. But there's traffic jams that last for literal hours. It's got constant power outages, and the ports are so inefficient that businesses lose money just trying to move goods in and out. Now compare that to Shenzhen, China. 40 years ago, it was nothing more than a fishing town. But in 1980, it became China's first special economic zone and began massively upgrading its highways, ports, and industrial parks. By the 1990s, Shenzhen had gone from producing cheap toys and textiles to becoming one of the world's largest electronics manufacturing hubs. And today, it's a megacity of more than 17 million people, home to tech giants like Huawei, Tencent, and its skyline rivals New York's. When you look at a city from a bird's eye view, roads, ports, power grids, and now digital networks are what connect everything. Without that infrastructure, good luck building a world-class city, my friend. But if you get it right, that's how small fishing towns can become one of the richest, most dynamic cities in the world in just a single generation. All right, so the next principle for any city that wants to get rich is to embrace technology. Those that don't, well, they simply get left behind. Just look across much of Europe, okay? When the world shifted into the digital age, many European cities from Milan to Madrid to Vienna didn't adapt. And they're still great places to live, but they're lagging behind places like Silicon Valley or Shenzhen when it comes to technology, which is why so many talented young Europeans end up moving there. And as a counterexample, take Seoul in South Korea. In the 1960s, it was one of the poorest countries in the world, but the government made a bold bet that technology would be its path to prosperity. This focus on innovation powered companies like Samsung, Hyundai, and LG, which became global giants. For a long time there, Seoul had the fastest internet in the world, and to this day it's one of the richest, most tech-forward cities on Earth. Like, they're already working on implementing 6G internet. You see, Aluxer, innovation is the ultimate force multiplier for a city, and that is why embracing technology is so important. Technology is the largest, fastest-growing industry in the world, so cities that embrace it are the ones that will shape global culture. In the 21st century, this just simply is not optional. But, while embracing technology is super important, you cannot afford to put all of your eggs in one basket, right? Because when that industry shifts, your whole city can go down with it. That's why the next thing all wealthy cities have in common is they diversify their economy. Look at Venice, for example. For literally centuries, it was one of the richest cities in the world, but its entire economy was built on controlling trade routes between Europe and Asia. When new routes opened up across the Atlantic, Venice failed to reinvent itself, and slowly it became little more than a tourist attraction. Contrast that with New York City, though. In the 19th century, it was an industrial powerhouse and America's gateway for shipping and trade, just like Venice. But when those industries began slowing down, New York reinvented itself as the financial capital of the world. Then it built on that foundation with media, fashion, and now tech. Or take a look at what Dubai is doing. For decades, its wealth came almost entirely from oil, but its leaders knew it wouldn't last forever, so they pivoted hard into tourism, aviation, and finance. Today, less than 1% of Dubai's GDP comes from oil, yet it's one of the wealthiest, most globalized cities in the world. What you should take away here is that a rich city is a flexible city. If all of your prosperity depends on one industry, you are fragile. But if you diversify well, you're in a position where you can adapt. All right, now this next principle only comes once a city is already thriving, but if you skip over it, your success will not last. A rich city has to invest in quality of life. Just look at Sao Paulo. It's one of the biggest cities in Latin America, producing enormous wealth. But inequality is so extreme, crime is so rampant, and infrastructure so underdeveloped that for most people living there, daily life feels like survival. That kind of situation drives away the very people needed to keep an economy growing. But compare that to Copenhagen, Denmark. They've built bike-friendly streets, tons of green spaces, and reliable public transportation systems. So today, it's consistently ranked as one of the happiest cities in the world. Zurich, Switzerland is another great example. The city is clean, safe. Healthcare and education are top tier. The quality of life is unmatched, which means Zurich is a magnet for both talent and money. When it comes to making a city rich, quality of life is basically the glue that holds everything together. You have to make sure your city is a livable, safe, and inspiring place where actual humans want to hang out. All right, so by this stage, it's not just about money anymore, right? Plenty of cities get rich for a while, but only a few of them manage to apply the next principle: creating a global brand. And you'll see how that translates even more into wealth, okay? Johannesburg, for example, the richest city in Africa, and we've got a global audience, so your answers might vary here, but honestly, Aluxer, how many of you know more than one or two things about Johannesburg? As important as it isn't really seen as a cultural beacon. But contrast that with Paris. Paris isn't just wealthy, it is iconic. For centuries, it has carefully cultivated a global image for itself as the art, fashion, romance, cuisine, and luxury capital of the world. And just in case you've never been there, yeah, they do make a mean croissant. Paris isn't just a place to do business. It's a place people dream about visiting, living in, and even just being associated with. The idea of Paris generates billions of dollars every year, which goes to show the power of building a global brand. It multiplies a city's wealth by turning it into something people aspire to be a part of. That's why people will pay a premium to live in Paris or Dubai or New York, because they're not just buying square meters of real estate, they're buying into an identity. Cities that don't do this, they still might get rich, but honestly, they won't be remembered. And in the long run, being memorable is one of the most valuable assets a city can have. Alright, so by this point, we've talked about attracting talent, retaining it, and controlling crime, building infrastructure, embracing technology, diversifying the economy, investing in quality of life, and creating a global brand. That is how you build a rich city, but cities have been around for thousands upon thousands of years, my friend, and I don't know how much history you've studied, but getting rich is one thing. Staying rich for centuries is something only a handful of cities have ever achieved. And that's because implementing the things that we've talked about today consistently across millennia, it is not easy, my friend. Take Athens, okay? 5,000 years of history, the birthplace of democracy, philosophy, and architecture that still inspires the world. In its golden age, Athens was the wealthiest and most powerful city on Earth. But over time, it failed to uphold many of these principles, okay? Today, it struggles with economic instability, poor infrastructure, and high unemployment. And I mean, Athens is still beautiful and culturally important, but its pride comes mainly from its past, not its present. But compare that to London. At nearly 2,000 years old, it survived plagues, fires, world wars, the fall of the British Empire, and countless financial crises. And yet, it's still one of the richest cities in the world. Why? Well, because it kept adapting. When it stopped being the center of an empire, it doubled down on being the center of global finance. When industries changed, it leaned into culture, education, and innovation. It turned itself into a financial capital, built on world-class universities, attracted global talent, invested in infrastructure, and cultivated a cultural brand recognized everywhere. London shows what happens when a city applies these principles over centuries. It thrives throughout history. Athens is remembered for what it once was. London is admired for what it still is, and what it's becoming. And that is really the ultimate principle you're going to learn here today: resilience. The wealthiest cities in the world are built on systems that outlast any single leader. They reinvent themselves when the world changes, and it always will. And they cultivate institutions that keep talent and capital flowing even in the hard times. They built resilience by stacking these principles together over and over again. And I mean, wealth with resilience, it can last millennia. Alright, so that, my friend, is how rich cities are actually built. A quick side note here, remember, if you want to build wealth and success for yourself, go and check out the Alux app, okay? We've literally got thousands of people inside leveling themselves up day by day, and you should probably be one of them yourself. By this point, you know how a person gets out of poverty, how they become rich, how they become a self-made billionaire, and even how to build a rich city. But when we're talking about a rich society, we're really talking about a rich country, right? And this is the hardest part of the entire process of building a rich society, because you can have two countries with the same people, the same geography, and the same resources, and end up with two very completely different outcomes. Like, for example, did you know that back in the late 1970s, North Korea was actually richer than South Korea, and its economy was growing way faster? But today, if you look at the two countries from space at night, I mean, the difference is shocking. South Korea is filled with bustling cities, and North Korea is almost completely dark, with just a single dim light in the capital. It's kind of crazy, right? How two countries with the same people, the same geography, the same resources, how they end up with such different outcomes. Well, you see, my friend, there are actually 7 unique forces that determine whether any country over time either gets richer or becomes poorer. The more it harnesses these forces, the more prosperous it becomes. And the more it drifts to the wrong side, well, the worse it gets. So today we're going to walk you through each of these 7 forces along with real-world examples so you can see clearly why some countries get rich and others don't. And if you can understand this, okay, you can truly build a rich society, so let's get into it. All right, so we began our discussion here today by talking about North and South Korea, right? And they're basically the perfect way to see the first of these forces in action, which is freedom versus control. So after the Second World War, the Korean peninsula was split into two, and both halves, honestly, started from almost the same place. Same people, same geography, both devastated by war, both poor and underdeveloped. Actually, North Korea had a bit of a head start. In the 1970s, their GDP per person was nearly double that of South Korea's. It had factories, hospitals, and schools that, by global standards at the time, were actually quite modern. But North Korea had total state control, which meant that every farm, factory, and company was run by the government. The state decided what you did, how much you earned, even where you lived. South Korea, on the other hand, embraced economic freedom. The government wasn't perfect. There was corruption and even dictatorship early on. But it opened up to global trade, encouraged entrepreneurship, and invested in industries like steel, shipbuilding, and eventually technology. Basically, it lets people and companies innovate and trade freely. So at their core, the two countries were on two completely different paths. And therefore, they had completely different results. At first, North Korea's central planning gave the illusion of order, but the economy wasn't actually producing much. It was actually being propped up by loans from the Soviet Union, which we'll talk about later, okay? When the Soviet Union collapsed in the early 90s, though, so did North Korea's economy, and it never recovered. North Korea's GDP per person today is less than $1,500. And South Korea's? Well, it's over $34,000. South Korea produces Samsung phones, Hyundai cars, and K-pop, while North Korea produces little more than coal, propaganda, and empty threats of nuclear war. The lesson here is simple, okay? You can control your people or you can let them prosper, but you can't do both. Economic freedom creates incentives for people to work harder, invent better things, and take risks because they can actually benefit from the fruits of their labor. On the other hand, state control kills that spirit, and that is what the force of freedom versus control really means. Now, the second force that decides a nation's future is integrity versus corruption. And nowhere is that clearer than when you compare Singapore with Nigeria, two countries that gained independence in the 1960s. So, if you'd asked literally anyone which country would have been richer 6 decades later, they would have said Nigeria without hesitation. And here's why, okay? Nigeria has oil, natural gas, iron, gold, limestone, diamonds, and really fertile land. Singapore, on the other hand, was a dingy swamp that you could literally drive across in less than an hour with traffic. But today, the numbers speak for themselves, okay? Singapore's GDP per capita is over $70,000, making it one of the richest nations on Earth. But Nigeria sits at about $2,000 per capita. Now, we're not going to chalk this up to a single thing, okay? But definitely one of the main reasons for this is how differently both countries handled corruption. Singapore's founding leader made fighting corruption his top priority, and today Singapore ranks among the 5 least corrupt countries in the world. By contrast, Nigeria is hovering around 150th out of 180 countries, and according to the World Bank, it's lost over $400 billion to corruption since its independence. And this is what the force of integrity versus corruption really shows us. If a country wants to get rich, the country has to get rich, okay? Not just a bunch of cronies. All right, moving on to the third force that shapes a nation's destiny is education versus neglect. And for this one, let's compare Austria with Pakistan. So after World War II, Austria was in ruins, okay? It had very little in the way of natural resources, but it made one deliberate choice. It invested in its people. By the 1950s, Austria was spending around 4 to 5% of GDP on education, building systems that combined academics with vocational training. Today, Austria's literacy rate is over 99%, and its education system feeds directly into high-skill industries like engineering, pharmaceuticals, and finance. So, it's no coincidence that it now ranks among the top 15 richest countries in the world with a GDP per capita above $50,000. Pakistan, on the other hand, has taken an opposite path. Despite being the 5th most populous country on Earth, it has consistently spent only about 2% of its GDP on education, and the results, well, they're kind of devastating. Only around 60% of people in Pakistan can read and write, and for women, that is closer to 45%. That means that tens of millions of children never set foot in a classroom or develop even the basic skills to participate in a modern economy. And just as bad as that is the fact that Pakistan's best trained engineers and doctors consistently leave the country for better opportunities abroad. All of this just goes to show the real gold mines of a country are its people. If you don't nurture them, you are wasting their potential. And that is why education is so important. All right, so moving along here today, the 4th force that shapes a nation's destiny is transformation versus extraction. And to show you what that means, let's compare the Democratic Republic of the Congo with Switzerland. So the DRC is one of the most resource-rich countries on Earth. It has minerals that power everything from smartphones to electric cars, and in fact, it supplies around 70% of the world's cobalt, which is a critical material for batteries. Yet, despite this immense wealth, the DRC remains one of the world's poorest countries, with the vast majority of its people living on less than $2 a day. I mean, tragically, it's one of the only places in the world where you can literally stand on trillions of dollars worth of resources and still be dirt poor. Switzerland, on the other hand, has almost no natural resources, but what it does have are industries based on transforming and perfecting natural resources. For example, Swiss watchmakers take small amounts of steel, glass, and sometimes diamonds and turn them into Rolexes and Patek Philippe's worth thousands of dollars. Swiss pharmaceutical companies turn basic chemicals into life-saving drugs, and Swiss engineers turn raw steel into the most advanced industrial machinery in the world. The result is that Switzerland now ranks among the top 5 richest nations in the world with a GDP per capita of over $90,000. You see, Alexer, extraction economies like the DRC rely on digging wealth out of the ground and selling it as is. And while you can capture a lot of value from raw materials, you can't create much. A kilo of gold might be worth $60,000, but when that same gold is transformed into a luxury watch, it could sell for $500,000. Transformation has a multiplier effect, okay? And that is why the countries that get rich move up the value chain. They don't export cocoa beans or mine cobalt or cut diamonds. They make chocolate and batteries and jewelry, because digging resources makes you money once, but transforming them makes you money forever. And that is how transformation makes countries rich. All right, moving on once again, the 5th force that determines a nation's wealth is innovation versus stagnation. And the clearest way to see this is by looking at Japan and the Philippines. So geographically, they've got a lot in common, right? Both are island nations in the Pacific with access to rich fishing waters, shipping routes, natural beauty, and both were heavily influenced by Western powers. On paper, their starting positions were not that different. Nowadays, though, when you think of Japan, you might think about Sony, Toyota, Panasonic, Nissan, and Nintendo. But can you name a single company from the Philippines? Let's be honest, okay, for most people abroad, it's just the place where you hire a cheap virtual assistant. Japan is a rich country today because after World War II, it poured resources into science, technology, and manufacturing. But by contrast, despite being one of the wealthiest countries in Asia in the 1950s, political instability, corruption, and weak institutions prevented the Philippines from becoming what it really could have been. Stagnation locks countries into cycles where each generation basically inherits the same limitations as the last. But innovation breaks that cycle, and that is why it can determine a country's future. All right, so the 6th force that determines whether a country thrives or not is prudence versus waste. And there's no better example than Norway and Venezuela. So back in the 1960s, both nations discovered that they had vast oil and gas reserves, like otherworldly amounts of wealth just sitting there waiting to be extracted. But what they did with that wealth couldn't have been more different. Norway treated this as a once-in-a-planet opportunity. They started drilling and selling their oil, and the government set up the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund, which used their oil money to invest globally. Today, That fund has over $2 trillion worth of assets, which means the government has around $340,000 for every one of its citizens just from that fund. Venezuela, on the other hand, is an entirely different story, okay? Get ready for this. You see, Venezuela's proven oil reserves are 60 times larger than Norway's. 60 times! But instead of saving that wealth, the corrupt government pocketed it for themselves. And instead of diversifying their economy, they doubled down on oil only, and when prices crashed, the economy collapsed, and they started printing so much money that prices were doubling every few weeks. Literally, okay, Venezuela went from being the richest country in Latin America to a place where people have to smuggle toilet paper across the border. Understanding the force of prudence is really quite simple, okay? Countries that get richer don't waste their wealth. Norway used oil to buy the future. Venezuela burned its oil and its future along with it. And now we're on to the seventh and final force of today that shapes a nation's future, and that is long-termism versus short-termism. And the contrast here is between China and Russia to make this crystal clear, okay? In the late 1970s, when China was recovering from a devastating famine, Deng Xiaoping, the new leader, came up with a bold plan. So while still keeping the Communist Party firmly in power, he opened up the economy to private enterprise and invited foreign investors. Gamble on China's long-term growth. And it worked. In just 4 decades, China literally lifted more than 800 million people out of poverty, and the growth never stopped. Today, China's cities are filled with skyscrapers. It's home to world-leading tech companies like Huawei, Alibaba, and Tencent. And it's the world's second largest economy with a GDP of over $18 trillion. A little further north, however, is Russia. After the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, Russia inherited vast natural resources, a massive territory, and a highly educated population. It could have had a fresh start and a promising future, but they didn't build out a long-term plan. Instead, Russia neglected the industries of the future and stayed dependent on the quick cash grabs from exporting oil and gas. The result is that today, despite being nearly twice the size of China, Russia's GDP is only a tenth of the size, roughly $2 trillion. And the gap is only getting bigger here. At the end of the day, you can either spend the future or you can build it, but you can't do both. And that's the power of long-term thinking. Alrighty, Luxor. So those were the 7 forces that determine whether a country gets rich or becomes poor. All right, okay, with that, my friend, you are armed with all the knowledge you need to build a rich society and also get rich yourself. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe for more videos like this one and leave a like. And let us know in the comments what your ideal rich society looks like. If you want to keep learning more about success, money, and reaching your potential, go ahead and check out the Alux app by scanning this QR code on screen. We'd love to have you on board, so you'll get a special 25% off discount on your yearly plan.